history and superstition. One of the things that I hope will shine through in my channel is my wish to perhaps look at history a little bit wider than is normal in school books and documentaries and articles. And this is a very broad topic, but I think it's important in how we connect with our past, and I feel many times that it can be a visit to a museum or looking at a documentary can be quite reductive towards our forebears, and also sometimes quite patronizing. And it's a little bit a shame, because what it inevitably leads to is much less respect and faith in our past. But as I said, it's a broad topic, so today I just want to talk about one angle, and that's superstition. So the default point of view of almost all documentaries and articles and so forth on our history in modern times, I would say post-Enlightenment, is that we currently are at our most knowledgeable and advanced, and that all times before us were to some degree more primitive and less evolved, to use an Enlightenment age term. There's not much room for back and forth, even though the historical record shows this quite clearly. For example, we still exist within the paradigm that among most people anyway, that humanity and civilization per se only really kicks off 5,000 years ago. About, more or less. And this is a view that kind of the evolutionary biologists and anthropologists and archaeologists more or less inherited from quite literal appreciations of the Bible before that, theology, and it kind of bled into the new materialistic view of history. Even though now the archaeological record is gradually punching quite big holes in this understanding. For example, Göbekli Tepe, which is for people who don't know, it's an incredible site in Turkey, megalithic site, enormous megalithic site, which would have taken extreme resources to build, and a complex society, and it's just thousands and thousands of years before the traditional dating of Egypt, the traditional chronology of Egypt. So and in between there is kind of like something of a gap. So at least this strict linearity isn't necessarily supported by the archaeological record. And in our countries here in the north, you see the same thing. If you look at artifacts in the Iron Age and the Viking Age, and you compare them to the Old Bronze Age, even artifacts from the younger Stone Age, they're really primitive in comparison to the bronze swords and the stuff that you find like thousands of years before the Iron Age. So whatever society was in southern Scandinavia at that time was a different ball game than later times. So there's this linear view that makes us, unfortunately, bleeds into how we view belief systems and the philosophy of ancient times. So that anything, if it's an animistic religion or a polytheistic religion or a monotheistic, all are different categories. If it's the Zhou dynasty in China, if it's the Egyptian religion, whatever they're doing in our analysis, of our modern materialistic analysis, they're projecting either individual hopes, fears and wishes onto animals and phenomena, or the community's hopes, fears and visions onto external phenomena. And it's misinterpretation of natural phenomena and all this kind of thing. So there's actually nothing spiritual going on. It's basically all mystical life, spiritual life is interpreted as misinterpretations by ancients. And I think this is quite patronizing and is a position of strong hubris. But I get it. Modern science, in the real sciences, where you expect an experiment to be duplicated in the standard physical world, where we have equipment capable of measuring, then anything that is extrasensory or exists phenomena that have action within a level that we can't measure, you can't reproduce that experiment. And perhaps there's something there, that what is sensory today isn't necessarily what was sensory for them. And what I mean with that is that anything extrasensory that ancient peoples mention or talk about, we confine into a spiritual world. Even stuff like acupuncture, there are quite a lot of doctors in the West who still say that it's all humbug, and because it's built on a sensory level that Western equipment has a difficulty measuring. I can remember I worked in work. I went and helped an elderly lady many years ago, and she was ill, so she had moved to the city in Oslo, the capital of Norway. But before that, she grew up in a small valley in mid-Norway in the mountains. And they didn't have any roads until I think it was 1957. She was born in the early 40s. So she grew up without roads, and she told me she'd never been, outside of her valley until her 20s or something. Anyway, we got to know each other, and we became friends. And one day she asks me, do you believe in spirits? And I said, I don't know. I mean, I have no reason to doubt it, because I haven't experienced anything to say that it doesn't exist. Likewise, I haven't experienced anything strong at that point in time that says it does exist. So I guess I'll have to, if it's someone I trust, I go off their testimony. And she said, yeah, she kind of figured that. Because what was weird, she thought, after she moved to Oslo, she hadn't seen any spirits or ghosts. Not a single one. And it kind of, she couldn't wrap her head around it because she used to see them where she lived in the valley. And she says, perhaps it's like this because they were always shy where she came from, not too happy around people. And she thought it was because they're like animals, like wild animals. If you make a lot of unnecessary noise, they just go away. They don't, they disappear into the forest. And that was what she said she suspected about spirits, and why they weren't any almost in the city. Not that she'd seen anyway. Yeah. And for me it was interesting because for her it was completely a matter of fact. They exist and she'd experienced it herself, but never in a city. And she also told that there was this man, he was just a farmer, but he was like the local go-to guy if there were any issues with animals. For example, there was one place, it was a crossroads or a bridge or something, where often the horses would get uneasy and they wouldn't want to keep walking. And according to they all knew locally that it was because of the spirits. So then they would get this guy, this farmer, and he could evidently, shush them away, like, get rid of the naughty cats. Just they're in the spirit world. So he would come and he would talk to the horses a little bit and wave his hands, and then the horses would calm down and whatever was bothering them was gone. And so all this stuff was for her, it wasn't something fancy, it wasn't something special, it was completely a matter of fact. But of course in the city, in Oslo, where people are much more enlightened, she was really shy about it because, it's, she didn't want to be looked upon as superstitious. And maybe there's something there, because who are we to say how people experienced the world back in the day? And for anybody who's seen, been in nature without city lights around and seen the starry sky, you know that it's just extremely beautiful and a completely different thing than how we see the sky in urban areas. And they lived lives where they were much more dependent on their sensory system, and so who's to say that they perceive things quite differently from us? Even just 2 or 3 generations ago, 2 generations ago, there were still mountain guides for the mountains between the East and West Norway. And you can read an old, there's this association in Norway called the Norske Turistforening. It's like for hiking association. And there's I remember I read an article in one of the really old magazines from start of the 20th century, where they were talking about the mountain guides who, even if it was complete fog and no sight, they navigated on intuition. They're dangerous mountains. You can, especially coming over to the west coast, if you take a wrong step there, you can really get into trouble. And they would navigate through fog on intuition. And just being able to sense where they were, which for us seems, if you've ever tried navigating through fog in the mountains, it's it's not very easy to do. So who are we to say how ancients perceived the world, who lived in a much more intimate relation to the world than us, and what they could feel, see and hear and sense. So if they said that the trees have lives and communicate, yeah, it's super easy to say that it's superstition. But who knows? Who knows? Maybe we are the tinfoil hat brigade for just calling everything except our post-enlightenment age understanding of, very mechanistic understanding of nature, calling everything else for superstition. If we are so evolved and wise today, I mean, you can compare the writings of Marcus Aurelius, the philosopher king of ancient Rome, with any modern politician, and I think it will quickly set things into perspective. Even though his son, who took over, wasn't so good, but there were great rulers before, and they absolutely put the world leaders of our times to shame. And so when we read, for example, in a recent episode in Halfdan Black's saga, and Halfdan the Black is portrayed as a wise and just ruler, when we read that he goes to sleep in the pigsty in order to get a prophetic vision. Of course, it's a little bit funny, but also, in laughing at it, what do we know? This was a wise, strong man who, achieved so much in his life. So if he went to lay down in the pigsty, maybe there was a reason, that had an effect that we just can't comprehend. And it's also led to a phenomenon that is kind of a double-edged sword. It's the loss of sanctity in historical sites. And I completely appreciate museums and preservation of sites, because without museums we probably would have been at least quite a lot less knowledgeable about physical artifacts that connect us to our past. On the other hand, we've done such a good job of ridiculing our written records from old times that I don't know if we know more through downplaying the written sources and the oral traditions, and just and to a high degree focusing on the physical artifacts. But I do appreciate going to museums and seeing the tools and the art of previous times. On the other hand, it results in sites that become completely stripped of their sanctity, and sites that were probably not placed at these places in a haphazard fashion. So, for example, I remember many years ago I was at Newgrange, and I hope they've updated how they present it, because at that time we were presented with a tale that Newgrange was built and left after only 50 years of use. I mean, such an amazing site, and such a ridiculous tale they told. And at the same time, the whole site is just like a tourist trap. And of course it's preserved, so this is nice, but there's absolutely nothing left in the experience at the place. And here I must say Denmark has a very good way of treating their old sites. There are over, there are around 100,000 registered burial mounds in Denmark. 86,000 I think that are registered. And there are many more than that. So it's kind of, there are a lot of ancient sites here. And in addition to all the burial mounds, you have the dolmens and the barrows and all this. So loads of sites, and only a very few of them have been excavated. The rest are, what do you call it? They are protected. So you see them in the landscapes, on meadows and fields and all over the place, and they're like beautifully untouched. So, and the ambience of these places is just, well, you feel it when you are there. You can feel why they chose exactly this place. So in Denmark, I think they've really done a nice job of that you still have some feeling of sanctity, and on most of these sites, and the kind of tourist representation information around it isn't intrusive most times. So it's a double-edged sword, but it comes also from this. Why I mention it is again this that if we do not believe that there is anything real in the sanctity, the spiritual side, then our respect for and treatment of these sites will suffer. And perhaps sometimes it's if we trusted our own traditions, it's okay to let a site gradually fade away. Maybe it's okay. It's my viewpoint that if we, when we look at history, have let go of our humble attitude and reduce things as is normal, where anything spiritual is, which clearly was a very, very big part of life before, still is a big part of life. Anything spiritual is viewed as, by default, as a mental illness almost. I mean, it's viewed as a misinterpretation of phenomena. And we risk making big mistakes. And we risk being the fools. Also, we risk losing a connection. It doesn't mean that, we have to be a pagan. to appreciate that they had a spirit, they had a real pragmatic rooting in life, and that the spiritual aspect of their life wasn't a flight of fantasy, but it was a part of a very pragmatic life, which is different when you read about how people view spiritual belief systems of the past. They're viewed as anything but pragmatic. But of all the people that I've had the joy and privilege to meet of previous generations in my life, the elder generations, they were, many of them, very strong believers, but all of them were well rooted in life, pragmatic, kind people, but strong of faith, many of them. So I think it's important to be humble and see this aspect as well when one reads and appreciates history. Also, how did they, things that can seem ridiculous to us, for example, Diodorus Siculus, the Roman historian who goes way back in time with his, he had access to the libraries of Alexandria before they were burned. So his histories go way back into Egyptian what we call prehistory and all this, and Egyptian society, and he describes like an animal that of armor, a bull with armor in Africa that no man can take down. And it sounds foolish, but if you skip to think a second, you quickly can, quite safely assume he meant the rhinoceros. And the same in the Roman and Greek historians that say when you get far north into the Hyperborean countries and there's enormous swarms of bees, and then some historians say this is ridiculous because there couldn't be bees that far north. But for anybody who's been in the north in the summer, there are enormous swarms of mosquitoes, and some of them are quite large, and it can even get dangerous. So if we have it's just to say this, that we shouldn't always, I think that people before us were super primitive and that their belief systems were off the wall. They weren't necessarily that. That's all for now. If you have any comments, and I guess on a topic like this there are many opinions, so please share. I think it's important to share opinions. And otherwise, if you enjoy the content, subscribe, and hope you join me for another video.